Hello, folks. This is your host, Sharlee Dixon. Before we get started today, we would really like your help. Please rate and review our podcast with 5 stars and make sure to share it with a friend. By spreading the word, you help us grow and reach more people, allowing others to discover the valuable insights shared in each episode. Thank you so much for being an important part of the Behavioral Health Today community.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective. Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Peter Fenger, and joining me today is Sharlee Dixon. How's it going, Sharlee?
I'm doing well today, Peter. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Well, we're glad you're here joining us for another episode of BHT Bytes, where we'll dive into today's trending topics with a relaxed, thoughtful approach. In today's episode, we're talking about something that affects us all, the way we engage with headline news. We live in a world where we're constantly bombarded with headlines designed to grab our attention and provoke emotional reactions. But have you ever stopped to think about how these reactions affect your stress level and mental health? Well, today we're exploring the differences between reacting and responding to headline news. How can we stay informed and empathetic without letting the news dictate our emotions or spiral us into unnecessary stress? Let's dive into today about how we can break free of this cycle and take control of our emotional responses. Sharlee, I want to ask you, as we start today, when you think of today's headline news, what sort of feelings come up for you?
Honestly, that last little section that you talked about really just that's where I am, trying to
Yeah.
find the sweet spot of staying informed
Mhm.
and not have a level of outrage that affects
Yeah.
my daily experience with people, just because I think
Mhm.
that some of the things in the news are set there for us to give a level of response that is negative. And so trying to really be informed and just be
Mhm.
informed and leave it at that. Like I know and I just know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have sort of the same similar reaction. I mean, it has seeped into so many aspects of my life that I can't ignore it. It's to the
Right.
point to where I have tried to cater my social media and or the news that I consume so that it's a little bit more focused,
Yeah.
but it just keeps on popping its head. And I think where I'm at is I started off as trying to avoid it, where if it would
Hmm.
come up, I just would get immediately turned off and I need to like turn away.
Yeah.
And I have sort of seen how the headline news has affected my social circle. I have friends that constantly like to talk about it and, they like to get upset about it and bring me sort of into that. But more recently, I've heard of this perspective of treating the news cycle as a narcissistic relationship. And what they mean by that is that if we can sort of approach it neutrally and not really give it the emotional charge that it's asking us, then we might be able to sort of navigate it with a little bit more resiliency or a more thoughtful approach to consuming the news, right? Being able to absorb the news, but having a closer understanding of how it's making us feel so we're not
Hmm.
quite dragged into it.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
I know in my lifetime, I've seen the news cycle, which pretty much started from the morning into the afternoon, and now it's a 24/7.
Yes.
Like we just get news constantly,
Yeah. And
and
you can't turn it off.
it's hard to detach from it.
Yeah.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And I've also seen how news media, even beyond just presenting the information, it has become
Hmm.
so emotionally charged that I
Yes.
don't feel like we're reporting the news in the same capacity as we used to.
I can absolutely agree with you. It's no longer just this is the news, feel how you
Right.
feel about it, but it tends to be whichever station or whichever network that it's coming from makes their spin on it, to
Mhm.
almost send their listeners or their readers into that direction, or more, let's
Right.
side with this particular view of it versus
Right.
just this is what it is. Make whatever informed decision you want to make or emotional decision you want to make based on
Yes.
your own feelings, not what we're
Yeah.
giving it to you as.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, like we look at the news stations and they are kind of divided based off of however you may lean, right?
Yes.
So I guess one of the questions I'm starting to ask myself is really how can I create a healthy detachment from sort of this emotional cycle? And one of the things I really started to anchor myself in is looking at my attachment styles and also having some curiosity around it. As you sort of think of the news story that sort of grab you, where are you starting to see your attachment styles?
That's interesting that you bring that up because I really hadn't thought about it in that way. I think I took the same or a similar approach. At first, I just tried to not listen to anything at all. I don't even want to know. Like I'll know when I know. I don't want to know. I don't want to see it on my socials. But because it's everywhere, it's really hard to do that. And so I did start to take more of just like you mentioned, a curious tone to it and not necessarily thinking about how it may affect me or why somebody thought that way, just curious about it, not necessarily trying to take the things personal, which is very difficult to do, of course, but really just thinking curiously about the things, not allowing myself to be taken down the slope of whichever direction is trying to lean me to, just really thinking openly about what else is happening maybe behind the scenes, or wonder why they said it
Sure.
to us that way, or I wonder if that
Yes.
same message comes across in all networks. Like, what did this network say versus that one? Like, are they the
Hmm.
same? Like, because the
Hmm.
truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So
Yes.
really just being more curious about how I reflect on the things that I hear.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, like having that perspective kind of brings me to this next point of reacting or responding.
Mhm.
Sort of going back to the idea that, the news cycle and that news headlines is sort of a narcissistic relationship with us, the viewers,
Mhm.
and being able to respond without necessarily reacting kind of puts us in this higher level of thinking, right? We
Yep.
talk about sort of like this wise man. And so sort of that perspective of responding and being very intentional about how we want to take in that information, maybe
Mhm.
deciding how it makes us feel, even giving us like a little bit more mindfulness and control over it. And it
Absolutely.
really kind of puts me in this next state of sort of awareness where I can
Mhm.
start to set boundaries on how much
Right.
I want to consume the news or social media and really
Mhm.
kind of diversify my sources. You talked
Right.
about how does this show up in other headlines? And I had a good conversation with a friend, and he was talking about, like, oh, when I'm looking at news, I find it most true if I find multiple sources reporting on the same answer. And
Yep.
I thought that that was a pretty interesting perspective. Like, yes, I can sort of like take in a broader scale. And if I start to see some of the same things, then most likely it's true.
It's true.
The other thing I also see a lot is opinion articles. And
Mhm.
so being able to sort of have a little bit more curiosity around these things, I'm able to
Yep.
really define of what are the facts and what's just an opinion. And I can sort of see how some of these things start to affect me.
Absolutely. And being able to have that level of discernment to say, maybe this is just their opinion about
Yes.
something true that really did happen, but
Yes.
maybe it's just that opinion or that swaying me towards one specific area when I can really absorb it to figure out how I really feel about it. So I really appreciate the
Mhm.
difference and notating the difference between reacting, which is something that's automatic, that I'm just going to automatically feel. Not to say that I may not react, but I'm not necessarily going to respond in the
Mhm.
same way that I react. So giving myself a chance to think about why is this important to me? For one, why do I even feel so strongly or not about
Emotionally
this particular?
charged.
Yeah, why is it drawing me in such an emotional way? And really just trying to figure out and have that level of discernment on how you can best respond. Because trying to just completely detach from it, I've personally found that it's not gonna happen.
It's
It's
not,
not
yeah.
realistic.
That was my experience as well.
Yeah.
You try and escape it, and it just keeps
Mhm.
on bringing you back in. It
Right.
just shows up in so many ways. It's now time for me to start to walk through this in a healthier way.
Right, right,
Yeah.
and so, what do you have any practical strategies for somebody who's trying to, find that line between staying informed without feeling overwhelmed or manipulated into being a certain way or feeling a certain thing?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think like, some of those mindfulness practices. Now, as silly as that sounds, like being able to really give yourself a pause,
Hmm.
you can really start to experience or start to feel when your body's starting to get a little bit more overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I do think like having that self awareness where you start to understand when you're getting too attached to a news or too emotionally pulled in. And then even maybe understanding where negativity is impacting your mood. Like I
Mhm.
know having conversations with friends, they'll just get upset about things. And then they're like kind of in a mood for a while.
Yeah.
Um, I think being able to be a little bit more mindful of that, and even if we could take that approach of neutrality around
Mhm.
some of these headlines, I think we might be able to calm ourselves a little bit more when it comes to the news cycle. And again, I think there was some fear around it, right? When we were
Yeah.
talking about avoidance, I
Mhm.
think it can make that experience a little less scary.
Absolutely. And I think on a previous BHT Byte episode, Graham and I were talking about how to kind of tailor those things and really even change your mood around them and switch it
Mhm.
from being angry at somebody because they felt a certain way and just being
Yes.
more curious. I'm like, why do
Yes.
you feel that way? And so I've really
Yes.
started to try to take that approach in the last few weeks since we've
Mhm.
had that first conversation about it. And it really has made a difference. I have a slightly personal story, a guy at work. He is very one way, and I am the
Mhm.
opposite. And the first conversation he ever had with me, I was really like, I was annoyed with him. Like, I can't believe that you feel like this. You agree with such things.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
But the next time we had a conversation this week, I said, have you thought about this way or how it may impact you this way? Like, I hear what you're saying, but think about it from this side. And not only was I able to remain in control of my feelings and my emotions around it, he actually stopped. And usually he's the
Mhm.
chatterbox. He stopped talking and said, "Oh, I'll have to think about that."
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was kind of a win for me because
Yeah.
not only was I able to control myself, I was able
Mhm.
to take someone who is historically been uncontrollable as far as political things are concerned.
Mm.
I hope that he really took a second to think about those things. He didn't say anything to me about it today, so I'm assuming
Yeah.
that he did. But I mean, I really think that that's that level of curiosity and really trying to remain neutral about some things, many of which at this point we don't have control over. I think it
Mhm.
will take us a long way in being able to relate to others.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Whether you're a longtime or first time listener to Behavioral Health Today, you're probably familiar with Triad, the company that brings you this podcast. But you may not know that Triad also hosts a community for current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, featuring trending content and education and career resources, all for free. If you are a behavioral or mental health professional, or you're studying to become one, join more than 80,000 people on Triad by claiming your free professional account today. Visit us at halotriad.com/BHT. That's halotriad.com/BHT and join the Triad community today.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you did a really great job of showing some great listening skills in that, right? You're able to really kind of absorb what somebody is saying. You're trying to understand what's most important and sort of communicate that back to them.
Right.
But I also think like by having that perspective of curiosity, you're also kind of approaching it from a place of love.
Yeah.
Like when you get curious and try to listen to other opinions, you're really trying to find commonality. And I think in your example that you're showing with your coworker, when you guys were able to come to some sort of commonality, you're really to start to strip it down some of the narratives and really try
Right.
to talk about it as people. And even at a very basic level, you just might understand where he's coming from. But I think
Mhm.
when you start to dig up, you can again pose those questions that might get them to really shift some of the thinking that it's not so black and white.
Right, right. And I hope that that's the way that it came across because again,
Yeah.
I really just instead of it being we're both just enraged with each other, that's not going to help anything at
Mhm.
all.
Mhm.
Hopefully being able to listen to the other side of that and think about how to respond versus just allowing that initial reaction to
Mhm.
happen, I think will just honestly will go a long way, not just in personal relationships, but in larger things within our community as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, like I so value, we've had past guests on our show and we've had Christine Miles come onto our show a number of times, and she's talked about her listening path. And that has been so helpful in order to have tough conversations, again, emotionally charged conversations, but in very healthy ways.
Right.
Because, when it really dials down, it's not about trying to get your point across, it's trying to understand what the other person
Yeah.
is trying to say, trying to understand somebody from their perspective really kind of neutralizes some of the emotional charge that comes behind some of these stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things I say in personal relationships even is let's take a second to like while someone else is talking to listen, not to respond, but listen to understand. And I think that's pretty
Mhm.
much what you're saying there. Yeah.
The other thing, it's kind of interesting, is are you conscious about the type of news that you're inviting into your life, in a sense that the types of news headlines celebrates happiness?
Hmm.
Because I know that there's just so many narratives that can really bombard you with problems, right?
Yep.
But I think that when we start to celebrate each other's happiness, for
Hmm.
example, when you're talking to somebody new and you recognize that somebody is, bringing something that makes them excited, when you can sort of stroke those flames, you
Yeah.
create better trust. And I find myself gravitating to those sorts of stories. Again, I'm going to go back to my mom. My mom, she loves listening to the news, and
Hmm.
she will, every time we come to visit, she will put on the news and she will
Yep.
watch it every morning, and she'll complain 90% of the time about how difficult the world is. But I know the things that really are gravitating her to those stories are the personal stories, and
Right.
those are the happy ones. And I
Yep.
know if she could probably just focus only on those stories, like
Hmm.
her whole life could feel more positive. And
Absolutely.
so I think even just having that perspective of what are the stories that bring you joy, or what are the
Mhm.
people that are sort of making a difference, those are the stories that sort of help me get through some of these difficult, harder storylines.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I'm not generally a news watcher. I do come from a
Mhm.
family of turn the news on,
Yes.
local news at night. I don't
Yes.
personally do a ton of that, but when I do, or in the past, when I have watched news types of shows, they're generally things like Good Morning America or the
Yes.
Today Show. Of course, they tell you about everything that's happening in the world and, in our areas, but it also has a large emphasis on let's talk about some happy stuff, because the
Yes.
reality is that life isn't necessarily happy all the time.
Yes.
But if we continue to focus on what is
Mhm.
negative, what is maybe even the most attention grabbing, the most enraging, that is what we're going to see if that is what we
Mhm.
focus on only. And
Yeah.
so being able to focus on and spend a bit more time seeking out that positive news really does
Mhm.
change your mindset about the state of where you are in your community, the state of the
Yes.
politics that we have going on here, really trying to focus on some positive. Because again, some of that stuff at this point we can't necessarily change.
We
And so
can't
really just
control it.
trying, no, you really can't. So what
We
you can
cannot.
control is you and what you
Yes.
allow to permeate your spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, another great perspective is just like look out your window. Like
Mhm.
look at your own community and see how maybe these bigger storylines like aren't really affecting your community. The other thing
Right.
is like we can also go local. Like if you see problems in this world, then starting locally and trying to make changes and really trying
Yes.
to like foster those relationships can be a real change from what we see on the headlines.
Absolutely. Yeah. Make positive headlines instead of
Yeah.
feeding more into the negative stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say, in a world of constant headlines and breaking news, it is more important than ever to take control of how we engage with the media. While it's crucial to stay informed, it's important to protect our emotional well being. By practicing mindfulness, becoming more self aware, and choosing to respond instead of react, we can break free from the cycle of stress and emotional manipulation that the news can create. Next time you see a headline that sparks a reaction, pause and ask yourself, am I reacting out of impulse or am I responding in a way that helps me stay grounded? Thank you for joining us in another episode of BHT Bytes, and we'll see you next time on Behavioral Health Today. We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.